going to go live in 3, 2, 1. All right, welcome everybody. Happy Tuesday. If you joined us for our earlier session, hopefully you're not sick of me by now. But for those of you just signing in, welcome. Thanks so much for showing up to another amazing chat and learn opportunity with Power to Fly. I'm super excited to introduce you to our speaker, but before we do that, I just want to go through a couple quick housekeeping items. If you've joined us for a prior chat, and at any time, this will probably feel kind of old hat, but I'm sorry, I'll get through it quickly for you. So like all of our virtual events, we want to encourage our audience to participate. We want to make sure that the time you spend with Power to Fly is time well spent. And so to that end, you are more than encouraged to ask questions, add comments, or if we ask, address one of your questions that you pre-submitted, add context to the question or ask a follow-up. We want to make sure that y'all feel like you are driving today's presentation and today's session. So please, please, please feel free to do so. If you have any kind of privacy concerns, I just want to flag that if you do come off mute, you will show up on our live recording. Now it'll either show your camera, if that's what you have turned on, or it'll show your login name, your avatar, whatever else you have set up. If you have any privacy concerns and don't want to show up on the live recording, not a problem. You can still have video on. As long as you don't come off mute, you won't show up on the recording. But if you do still want to participate, but you don't want to be on that recording, awesome. All you have to do is throw your questions, comments, anything else into the Zoom chat. It'll be, you should be able to see it on like a pop-out window, basically. And then if you are in like serious deep cover, don't want anyone to know you're here, not a problem. You just need to send a DM to me as opposed to sending your message or your question to the entire group. So in that Zoom chat window, you'll just select my name from the drop-down instead of sending it to everyone. Like I said, this is being recorded. So if if something, it's nice in a couple of ways. It means that you don't have to take notes and you don't have to worry about if you didn't quite catch what somebody said. But the other thing that's really great is that it's a really awesome way for you to rewatch the recording as much as you would like. And you can also share it with friends. So whether you stay for 5 minutes today, you stay for 60, or if you registered for this chat but didn't have time to watch it today, so you're watching us from the future, everybody that registers, regardless of when you come or not, will get an email in about 1 to 2 business days, and it'll have a link to where you can watch this recording. Now, if Bernadette comes up with something absolutely amazing, mind-blowing information or an idea or something you just have to share with somebody right away, you don't have to wait for that email. You can navigate over to our Power to Fly page, our channel on YouTube. We are at Power to Fly. And you'll be able to check out this recording within usually about 5 to 15 minutes of the end of today's session on our YouTube channel. Like I said, our videos are always free to watch. You can check out a bunch of our back catalog on our YouTube page, but there's even more stuff available on the Power to Fly website. So I'll share some links later on where y'all can do some searches in our archives and find more chats that we've done on past subjects that are similar or different topics that interest you. So like I said, we are being recorded, so keep that in mind. You can also write into the chat if you've got any questions. I'm more than happy to try and help if I can. And last but not least, please feel free to keep up with us on social. So we are at Power to Fly, like I said, on YouTube. We're also on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. So it's a great way to kind of stay up to date on some of the virtual events that we're hosting. We've also got, a bunch of other resources for y'all to take advantage of. And most, if not all of our services are free. So please, please, please take advantage of that. So let's jump into today's session. And I'm really excited to introduce you to our amazing speaker. So Bernadette Smith is the CEO of Equality Institute, which is a boutique diversity, equity, and inclusion firm whose mission is to provide relevant, impactful, and comprehensive solutions to organizations. For over 12 years, Bernadette has spoken to thousands of enthusiastic business leaders, and her expertise has been sought after by the New York Times, the Washington Post, as well as Fast Company. So welcome, Bernadette. We're so happy to have you.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be here today. And hi, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, whatever time zone you're in, thank you for joining this conversation today.
Awesome.
Whether you might be in the future.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Right?
I mean, these recordings live on, so we'll absolutely be talking to people in the future. Before we move on to some of the questions that we were asked today, can you tell us a little bit about maybe like why you started the Equality Institute and what the subject of this chat about allyship as a leadership skill, what that really means to you and why you're so excited to speak on it?
Yeah, sure. So I have been an entrepreneur for 17 years. And I started my first company when I was living in Boston, Massachusetts. And this was in 2004, so a long time ago. And I started a company to plan weddings for same sex couples when the law changed in Massachusetts. It was the first state in the whole country where same sex couples could get legally married. And they were trying to change the constitution and ban it before the law went into effect. And I was this like young, passionate activist type person doing event planning for a living for nonprofits. And I decided that because there were all of these couples, some of whom had been together for decades, waiting to legally marry, I decided that I was going to be a wedding planner. I was going to start a business to help these same-sex couples get legally married without experiencing discrimination while navigating a very traditional, very like heteronormative wedding industry. My goal was to be an activist wedding planner. And I did that for quite a while, and it brought me quite a bit of attention. I was in the news a lot and did really well with it. And a few years after I started the business, I started hearing from, this was like the advent of social media. I started connecting with other wedding planners and other professionals across the country and across the world who were messaging me and asking me questions like, what's the difference between a gay wedding and a straight wedding? And like, why do I need to do this? Why should I, what do I need to do differently? And I realized that there was a huge opportunity here for me to not only improve the experience of the couples that I was working with personally as a planner, but also the experience that these couples were having across the world with other wedding planners and other people in the business. At the time, only about a third of Americans supported same sex marriage. And like I said, Massachusetts was the first state in the country. So I ended up writing 3 books all about LGBTQ weddings, training wedding planners, hotels, catering companies, all throughout the wedding and hospitality and travel industries for years. And as time went on, I decided it was time for me to retire as a wedding planner. I was all of a sudden living in New York City and planning, $250,000 weddings, and I realized, well, this is not actually what I signed up for. I signed up to be an activist, and all of a sudden I'm like a luxury wedding planner, and it really wasn't my vision for myself. So and then I went through a personal divorce, so I also had some of my own drama, and ended up moving to Chicago and retiring from weddings and expanding my business, the training side of my business, into other industries and also beyond LGBTQ. So that's my personal journey. I know it's kind of a long story, but that's where the path I've been on, and so it's been so exciting to be able to work in lots of different kinds of industries now, and advocate for lots of different kinds of underrepresented folks. Um, but yeah, that's where it all started.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I also have a background where I was in wedding and event planning for a little while. And so I can completely understand how you start off in one area, and then if things go well, that's great, but you can end up in a completely other segment of the industry than what you maybe intended to do. So that's really, really interesting to have you share with us. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so before we jump into our questions for the day, I just want to highlight a couple things here. So I know that a bunch of y'all pre-submitted questions ahead of today's chat, and that's awesome. We're super excited. There's some really great questions. So what we did is we compiled that whole list. We kind of removed like redundant or repeat questions, and we tried to arrange it into a conversational format. Now, to that end, we're going to try and get to as many of these questions as possible. But like I said earlier, if you are on today's call and you took time out of your day to spend with us, you get like the preferential treatment. So if you have a question and you want to make sure that you get an answer to it, make sure you come off mute and ask. The other 2 great ways to do it are to put them in the Zoom chat or DM me directly. So please feel free to do that at any time during today's chat. You're also welcome to come off mute if you'd like. Just make sure that you're not interrupting Bernadette or any of our other attendees. You can feel free to interrupt me. I get paid to fill the silence, so please feel free to interrupt me. Answer. The other rule of thumb is that unless you are actively speaking, like in the middle of your sentence asking a question, make sure that you remain on mute. You'll see me going off and on mute constantly throughout today's session, mostly so that nobody has to listen to the bulldogs snoring under my desk. So just keep that in mind. If I do mute you, it's not a rebuke. It's just because you've got background info or background noise that's interfering. But obviously I won't mute anybody in the middle of what they're saying. So last but not least, we're going to go over quickly a couple of the principal themes for today's conversation. So some of the things we're going to try and touch on are awareness of your own advantages and how they can be used as a leadership asset. We're also going to discuss ways to be an ally in the workplace using the ARC or ARC method of communication that Bernadette's going to kind of elaborate on, as well as tools to recover from accidentally offending someone and how to speak up if you do witness this, this offense or microaggressions or macroaggressions directed at someone else. All right, so to get us into our conversation here, I just wanted to highlight something that you had said right before we went into this at the end of your bio about, how you had jumped into this field of LGBTQ wedding planning despite not being a member of the LGBTQ community.
Oh no, I'm totally gay.
Oh, are you? I'm so sorry, I didn't realize. I am so sorry. I thought that you were coming at this completely separate. So my apologies.
No, like
super awesome.
So gay. I'm like super gay.
Like super gay. I love it. All right. So, okay. So maybe conversely, so like something that I've kind of come around to in the last year or so is I've become a lot more vocal and a lot more active in the racial justice movement, and trying to talk about racism not only in the workplace but also in how much it's like built into our systems of living and government and economy and all this stuff. So this person had written in asking, and I thought this question was really interesting, how did you realize that your actions made with the purpose of being as inclusive as possible were only having an impact on a portion or half of the population? So I feel like there's a lot of people out there that think that they're doing good or at least not doing harm, and maybe have no idea that the good or the not harm that they think they're doing isn't really as far reaching as they think.
Sure. I mean, I live in a bubble, right? I am a white woman. I am a lesbian. I have people in my life, my family, my friends support me. I have a successful business. I live in a blue state. I've always lived in a blue state. And I just, for many people, the night former President Trump was elected came as a shock, right? And that was, I was as shocked as everyone else because of my bubble, because my feeds reflect people like me. My LinkedIn feed, my Facebook feed, my Twitter feed, all preach into the choir right here, not exposing myself to differences. And I think that was a negative thing, right? So I certainly tried to understand other perspectives in the years since. And then I received quite another shock to my system last year when George Floyd was murdered, and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery and all the others, right? All of the others in this, including this week, because I realized that I was not using my privileges, my advantages to lift others up. I was sticking with my gay thing, right? Anytime I would be invited to a fundraiser for an inner city school or a Black Lives Matter rally years ago, I would be like, I have my thing. I do the gay thing. That's my thing. And I'd stay quiet in my little lane, right? And still feeling, but having felt like, oh yeah, like I'm an ally. But at the same time, I was always afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing. I was afraid of accidentally offending someone. So I was just silent. I was complicit to microaggressions. I was complicit to white supremacy. I was complicit to the lack of diversity within my own network, my own personal network, my own professional network. So, I've been on my journey, even as someone who thought I was doing the right thing all these years. even someone who's been doing diversity work all these years.
Yeah, well, and thank you for sharing that, because I think the idea about the bubble is so accurate, right? We all get into, we don't realize that what we're surrounded by, just because it's your world doesn't mean it's the world. It doesn't, what you're experiencing is not necessarily what other people are experiencing. And I think you're definitely not alone in that idea of both being in the bubble and not necessarily seeing the bubble, but also kind of feeling like you should stay in your lane. I mean, like, I am subject to a lot of the same privileges and resources that you are, like, in our backgrounds are somewhat similar, but also, like, I remember, living on the East Coast and being, like, very much geographically closer to, the protests and the riots that were happening in Baltimore several years ago when Black Lives Matter got started. And I remember making a conscious choice of, like, not that I didn't support them and didn't think that people had a point and that these like protesters need to be listened to, but I very much saw it as a, like, well, that's not for me. Like, I shouldn't be there because it's not my fight. It's not something, like, I don't have, to put it very crassly, I don't have skin in the game. So I should support them from afar, but that's not something I need to barge in on because it's their moment, their thing. And that's, something that's not correct thinking. I mean, it's like we talk to people about on Power to Fly a lot, is, the idea of gender equality and gender parity in the workplace. And you don't get to that by only having the women on your side. You need buy-in from everyone to make these things happen and make change. So yeah, I very much identify with what you said about that.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, and then of course the ironic part is that here I am for the past, not the recent part of my career, but for years and years was preaching about LGBTQ inclusion and not always being really conscious of ways I was being exclusive of others, right? And so here I am looking for other communities to support the LGBTQ community, but not doing anything as a member of the LGBTQ community to support other communities, right? And so that's not fair. That's a complete oversight.
Well, I think it's a common one.
Again,
it's common because you feel like, well, I'm including them. I want them to be on board with my thing. So, everybody's welcome, and you feel like you're being inclusive, but you don't recognize potentially ways that you are either not really doing enough to include certain people, or like unconsciously excluding people by either how you're asking or what, like you said, like ways that you're showing up for your own cause, but maybe not for theirs. All right. So allyship has obviously become like a really popular and really thrown about term, as also a really contested term. So how would you define responsible allyship? I think probably the goal that most people are striving for, if this is something that you are trying to do in your own life.
I think that a responsible ally is someone who has advantages, who uses their advantages to be the voice of others who are more marginalized than themselves, whether they are in the room or whether they are not in the room. A responsible ally is aware of how their advantages can lift others up. So I really think that a great ally, a responsible ally, uses their words, like uses your power and your influence in the systems that you influence, your voice within those systems, to create spaces for others to thrive. So that means speaking up if you witness a microaggression or any sort of bias incident. So speaking up as an ally, but also being an ally to people who may be struggling for whatever reason they're struggling. Maybe they're struggling because they have kids who are having a hard time remote learning, or maybe they're struggling because another unarmed Black kid was shot by the police this week, or maybe they're struggling for whatever it happens to be. In my opinion, an ally uses their influence and uses their advantages to connect and support those who have fewer advantages than themselves.
I think that's a really good way to put it. And thank you for highlighting that, because you're right. And it can feel kind of overwhelming, especially if you maybe have not been thinking in these kind of terms before, or you have not necessarily been conscious of the ways that you might be excluding somebody, is it can really feel like a lot to keep track of. It feels like you're constantly having to monitor your every move. But one of the things that I like to kind of push back on and say, like, okay, but look at it from the other perspective. These are, you look at communities like the Black community, who for decades upon decades have been having to engage in code switching and figuring out ways that they can show up at work but still conform to the rest of the group and not cause offense to anybody, and also not be seen as the token minority or not be seen as the angry Black person. Like, this is a lot of the work that these people have been doing for a very long time, and it's not really that much of a burden on you to try and take some of that off them. It's more equal sharing of something that never should have been a burden for anybody to begin with.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that it's deeply unfair that as white folks, we have so often relied on Black folks to educate us on how not to be racist. I mean, we perpetuate it. We are benefit from systems of white supremacy, and then we're still looking for them to tell us. No, it's all about self-education, and there's lots of resources out there for us to learn how to stand up, not only for Black folks, but for other folks who are suffering and who have fewer advantages than we do.
Yeah, for sure. And like you said, it's one of those things where if this is when you're coming to the table and you're late, that's okay, because late's better than never. But you're right. It's absolutely one of those things where you feel like, okay, well, if I've been doing it wrong this whole time, and this is how society and my education and my, my upbringing and my experience has raised me to be, then yeah, you go to the source. You ask people how they actually want to be treated. It makes sense in the idea, but like the practicality of that is that you are putting the onus on that person. And you're right, like we live in the age of Google. You can find resources for a lot of different things. And you have to be kind of discerning and you have to do a lot of research, but think about all the ways that you learn how to exist in the world now. Most people don't just graduate from school or college or whatever and go out and get, you don't go through a training of how this is how you adult, this is how you business, this is how you go to get a job and behave in the workforce. This is, work that you do learning and growing and making, by experiencing it. So this is definitely, kind of similarly gonna be a process. It's not something you do overnight, and it's something you have to keep working at and keep trying at, and you're gonna fail and you're gonna make mistakes, but that's what you have to do.
Absolutely. And yeah, you're right. Yes, it's some of us are coming to this journey of allyship later than others, but it's not too late. It's not too late. And what I'm afraid of, and what happens a lot, and I hear this from a lot of folks who want to be allies of the LGBTQ community, and I know it applies to other communities as well, is that they are afraid of saying the wrong thing with the letters, right? What do those letters mean? I'm afraid of getting the letters wrong. I'm afraid of saying the wrong thing, so I don't say anything. And I know that well-meaning people don't say anything because they just don't know the words to say. And it's as simple as that. It's like analysis paralysis. We start overthinking. And then we just don't say anything because we don't want to step in it and we don't want to accidentally offend someone. And I get it, because I have been on that journey myself. And so I think we just got to keep talking. But one of the things I created as a tool to help us have better conversations and to help us get into this more solutions-oriented mindset is this tool called the ARC method. And the ARC method stands for Ask, Respect, Connect. And it's really has a wide variety of uses, but one of the ways is to be a good ally just by having better one-on-one conversations, by asking deeper questions. And it's something that leaders can use. It's something that individual contributors can use just to connect across differences. I'm going to put a link to it here on the screen so you can download it if you want, but I'll also talk about it so you can get a better sense of like what that actually means. But essentially, ARC method stands for ask, respect, connect. And what that means is that what I believe is that we often, I just lost my train of thought. What
The ARC method.
the ARC method, I won't forget that. But what I believe is that when we don't know what to say in any given situation, the solution is to ask a question. That's the secret. Is if we're stuck for words, ask a question. But the questions should be thoughtful. And if we're trying to connect with someone who's different from us, we shouldn't connect by asking a question that's nosy. So, for example, don't ask a transgender person, when's the surgery? Because that's not the type of question you should ask. We should also not ask a question like what you said before about, things that you can look up on Google. So if you're trying to figure out what it means to be anti-racist, ask Google or Siri or Alexa, or you can find those resources. But actually asking a question to connect across differences can be incredibly powerful. And with a coworker or an employee, those questions can be things like, what's your experience been like at this company or within this organization? As a leader, you can ask an employee, what can we do to keep awesome people like you around? It's a really powerful question. Who here would not want to be asked that question? What can we do to keep awesome people like you around? The leader asks you that question, that could totally be a game changer in how they relate to you and how they support you going forward. As a peer, as a coworker to coworker, you can ask a question like, how can I support you? Is there anything I can take off your plate? Who wouldn't want to be asked that question from someone else on your team, right? I mean, those are the types of questions that if you have, that you can use to again, to connect across differences, to let someone know that you have their back. So that's the A. The A is asking a really great question. But you don't want to just ask the question. You also have to respect the answer. And that means that you're not, sitting with your arms crossed or Googling or on your phone or checking your email or messaging while they're respecting. It means that you're an active listener. You're not dismissing the answers, but that you're respecting them, that you're being fully present. And then, so that's the R. And then the C in the ARC method is for connect. And that means to paraphrase, to validate. It means that you can say something like, wow, that's really tough. I had no idea. Is there anything I can do to help? Or maybe it means that you say something like, thank you for sharing that with me. I'm sure it must have been really hard. And these conversations, they don't have to be long and they don't have to be awkward or long drawn out things, but they're a simple way to connect with someone. And so that's one use of the ARC method to really become an ally in a positive, proactive way, just by connecting across differences, by using questions. But you have to follow all three letters of the ARC, ask, respect, and connect, or the ARC will fall flat. So you can actually download the ARC method at that link on my name. And there are 3 versions of it. And so that's just one of the ways I use it to help people connect as an ally.
I absolutely love that. And I was thinking as you were talking, like it's things that are, questions or methods of talking or connecting to somebody that might seem kind of awkward or might seem like unusual if you haven't had to navigate differences between or among a group like people before. But as you're talking, like these are the same kind of questions that you could ask, like I have asked these questions in the similar way to coworkers who have kids, because I don't have children. I have 2 dogs, but I don't have kids. So I don't know what it's like to be a working parent or to be a single working parent. So, I ask questions like, how are you doing today? How's everything going? What can I help you with? But then you're right, it's also having that respect. And especially when it's coming up on, let's just say touchier topics, like things that maybe you are not skilled or don't have the experience in discussing. One of the things that I've found to be very helpful is to sort of preface the question with a question and ask, like, especially if it's going to be something that touches on a very serious topic, do you mind if I ask you a question about such and such? And for me, at least, it's helped, especially when I'm not really sure how to word something. is to ask if they're okay with talking about the topic. And if they are, great, but then proceed with, I'm not really sure how to say this and I don't want to come off insensitive, but here's my question. And that buys you a little bit of wiggle room, because that way you're prefacing it with your intention. So that way maybe it's a little more clear what you're trying to get at, and it's less likely you'll be misunderstood, especially when you don't have negative intentions in mind. But yeah, like I love the respect angle too, because if they don't want to talk about it, like not everybody has to be a spokesperson for their group or their intersectionality.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that you're right. It is important to preface. It can be, and it depends on the context, to preface ask permission to ask the question. And also, perhaps before you get into becoming too overly curious and asking too many questions, perhaps share a little bit of your own experience by being a little bit of vulnerable first, by admitting what you don't know, by sharing about a time that you may have felt like an outsider, or a time that you struggled to maintain balance, or maybe what it was like when you first started working at the organization. You know, when we are a little bit vulnerable ourselves, others are more likely to open up. They're more likely to share their own experiences, and they're more likely to, leaders are more likely to create psychological safety by being a little bit vulnerable, by being humble and curious with their employees. And that's incredibly important, because psychological safety is a key characteristic of successful teams. Google did a huge study of their most successful teams and found that the best ones all contained high amounts of psychological safety. And asking good questions, respecting those answers, and connecting those answers, validating, that all really helps to create a psychologically safe environment, whether you're a leader or whether you're just a peer, an individual contributor.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good point to make there, is that you're trying to establish, whether you're a leader or you're a coworker, or it's, your neighbor or a family friend or just an extended friend, that kind of thing. You're trying to create that psychological safety. You're trying to let somebody understand, or at least let them know that, hey, I may not be like the rest of the people from my group, or I might not fit a lot of the characteristics or the attributes that you might think I have. So how can I help you? Kind of like opening up yourself to say, here's what I've got going on. And I love the response of like, thank you for sharing, because that helps you. I mean, it definitely shows that appreciation, and that, that you are grateful to that person for taking time to tell you things, but it also, me at least, it makes me far less likely to step into either problem fixing territory if the person does not want it, or that's not what the goal of that interaction is, or to not assume things like that must have been so hard, or I understand, or something, because I obviously don't. I have not lived that experience. I don't have anything in my life that has impacted me the way a lot of people's skin color impacts them, or or your sexual orientation, or your ability levels, or whatever. So it's very important to try and maintain that understanding and that respect, and try to connect, but not in a way that assumes you know what you're talking about.
Yeah, I agree. I think that assumptions, we may all make assumptions, but they can really cause bias.
I made one earlier in the chat. I mean, seriously, like, I just assumed, because you were talking about a divorce, and I just assumed, okay, well then you must have been divorced from a man. Like, it's one of those things that you're going to make assumptions based on your background or based on your inferences from talking to somebody. But it would have been much smarter on my part to ask, to instead of assuming, just ask a question. Obviously in a respectful way, and not like, not to say like, well, now I know how to treat you, but like to ask out of a real curiosity and respect for the other person.
Meg, I was an early adopter of both gay marriage and gay divorce.
It is wonderful. I'm sorry, but it is wonderful.
It's okay. It's all in the past.
And it brought us to where we are, right?
That's right. It's all good. My ex and I are great.
That is, having been friends with a lot of people through divorces in various sexual orientations, it always helps, always. Okay, so before we leave the idea of the ARC method, do you think that the ARC method is really transferable across countries, cultures, industries? Because obviously, the U.S. is definitely having a moment right now, or a movement that's been going on for about a year and a half. But outside of the U.S., this whole conversation is still happening to varying degrees in various countries and cultures. So what do you think it's transferable in the state that it's in, or do you think that there's a little bit of tweaking to be done, or more steps or less steps depending on the context?
Yeah, I think that there are tweaks that can be made to use it in cultures where confrontation is less in less confrontational cultures, right? And in cultures where there's more hierarchy, it's certainly hard to ask a question of a leader, for example, to turn the tables. And honestly, here it's hard to use the ARC method towards a leader as well, especially because there's a different context I haven't taught you yet, which is about using the ARC method to call out a microaggression or some sort of bias. And so, yeah, I think that it's not always applicable as is, but you add additional context to cultural nuances. And at the end of the day, it's all about ask, respect, connect, and that's universal.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button for a second. No, I think that's awesome. And I love the idea of really kind of not painting everybody with the same brush, but starting from a similar pattern to kind of use it in multiple situations.
You want to use it from a place of curiosity, not confrontation. I mean, that's a really important part of the ask, is to come at it from this really genuine place of wanting to connect and wanting to be present, not confronting. And it becomes this sort of gentle ask. And when the ask is a gentle ask, you can also use it to call someone out, right? So if you've heard something offensive or potentially offensive, or a comment that someone might not even realize is offensive, you can say something like, did you actually mean it when you said that? It's a really simple question. You might not know it, but that's actually offensive. Or can you explain what you meant when you said that, I think that person was a diversity hire? Can you explain that to me a little bit? And if you approach that person from a place of curiosity, not confrontation, they're less likely to get defensive. And they also might have a hard time explaining themselves. But if you sit with that and you are present with them and you don't judge them to the best of your ability, which I know can be easier said than done, you can get someone to a place of understanding and reflection.
Yeah, I love the idea of kind of starting in slow, or coming from that place of respect to start with, or curiosity even, because that way, if you've misread the tone, or if you're inferring something that person didn't mean or whatever, it's a little bit easier to walk back and make sure that you're not offending that person, or that you are not confronting that person in an embarrassing way or something like that. But but it's I love what you're saying, because it's very reminiscent of something my mom taught me, which if you've been on any chat with me, at least more than two, you've probably heard me say this, because it's one of my favorite things. But she calls it painting someone into the nice corner. So it works with ageism, sexism, racism, a whole bunch of different isms. But if somebody says something in front of you, whether it's directed at you or directed at somebody else, you can say, I know you didn't mean that to come across as insensitive, or I know you didn't mean to, hint that this person is not a good hire for this. Can you explain what you actually meant? Because I know that wasn't it. And it allows that person to have the wiggle room to say, oh, no, this is what I actually meant, or they have to step squarely out of the nice corner and into jerk territory. And it's one of those things that really works in a lot of situations, because I get tongue-tied and I don't say the things that I want to say because I can't think of them. So it's one of the things that I really love to employ for just situations like this.
Yeah, I think it gives folks the benefit of the doubt. And listen, I know that can be hard, especially if the comment is egregious, but we don't change behavior by shaming people. We don't change behavior through ridicule. We change behavior through compassion, through reflection, through empathy. And I know that requires a lot of patience, but that's behavioral science.
Well, it makes a lot of sense. You know, you're trying to, you're hoping that the person didn't mean it, and maybe it just requires rewording, but either whether they just need to reword what they're saying or they truly don't understand what they're doing, you're trying to get them to learn. And learning doesn't happen when someone feels shamed, because then they don't feel free to ask questions or follow up or to learn more. So yeah, I love that idea. I love kind of coming at it from a place of compassion, because maybe that person's deserving of the compassion, maybe they're just being a jerk. But if you lead from that place, you don't have to be either concerned or embarrassed or regretful about the actions you took to try and stop that behavior.
Absolutely.
So let's talk about this idea of if you're coming at somebody who's been either really egregious or maybe just doesn't really understand, like especially my parents, or at least some of my family members, I've had issues with this where they just don't understand the importance. They don't think it's that big a deal. They just don't get it. So can you talk about how to explain that a diverse and equitable society really depends on that allyship from people that are not within these marginalized, underrepresented, under-resourced, underprivileged communities? Because it can be really hard to find the wording to explain that to somebody, especially someone that doesn't really identify or doesn't seem to understand or side with this kind of movement.
Yeah, I think that this is where it's important to think about kind of the two-pronged approach. One is data and the other is storytelling. So data and storytelling, if used in conjunction, can really help people feel the need to change. One of the pieces of data I like to share is about the LGBTQ community. I shared a piece of data that says that 31% of Gen Z identify as LGBTQ plus, and 20% of millennials. And that's an awful lot of folks who don't identify as exclusively straight or exclusively male or female. And so people are shocked. And then I share, screenshots of things like airlines allowing people to choose gender X, and driver's licenses in Indiana and Arkansas allowing for third gender options. And people are like, what? Is this really happening? And that type of information, it almost makes people feel like left behind, like, whoa, I'm really out of touch. But that actually can be a powerful trigger. And also, I mean, certainly for leaders, one of the pieces of data that there's lots of data around the financial benefits of diverse teams, or how much Gen Z and millennials value diversity and inclusion. So there's tons of data out there about that, or how much data or how much young folks or millennials, Gen Z value corporate social responsibility. There's lots out there, but when you combine that with storytelling, sharing your own experience, sharing your own perspective, storytelling that's from the media, it could be documentaries, it could be whatever, articles, can really be effective. But you kind of have to know your audience, right? And know what's going to work for them. But usually the two-pronged approach works well. I also really like to make it practical for people. I don't like to just say, okay, well, here's all the information and this is why it's important, but now what? What do we do now? Okay, what do I do with all of this information? It's bringing me back to this analysis paralysis. I'm overthinking. Oh, I follow the arc. I ask a question. Okay, that's how I do it. Right? Because I want to be solutions oriented. I want to move people from this place of inaction because they're afraid of saying or doing the wrong thing to a place of active allyship because they have a tool to do it. Conversation starters.
That's so important too, because you're right, that idea of wanting to help and not being sure where to start can be really paralyzing. It can feel like, well, I don't even know where to go from here. And as we've all hopefully heard a lot of and learned over the last year and a half, that silence is honestly, in a lot of ways, just as bad, because you're not standing up, you're not using the privilege, the space, the respect, the resources that you have to help anybody else. You're basically sitting there doing nothing.
Exactly. Exactly. And so, and I think that that's sort of what the opportunity that we all have as allies is to no longer be passive and to stand up for others. And I think that's just super cool, because we can do a lot more than we think we can, and it's a lot easier than we expect.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so let's talk about this from a slightly different angle. This person had written in asking, how can I overcome having said insensitive comments to my colleagues in the past? I didn't realize I was being insensitive in the moment, and now, since a long time has passed, I don't know how to approach this issue. So I feel like this is something that everybody goes through at some point, realizing that something that they've said, belatedly realizing, I'm sorry, that something they've said was offensive or insensitive, or rub somebody the wrong way. And it can feel really hard to like redress this, or like revisit this topic, especially if a lot of time has gone past, especially for me at least, if you're like really ashamed of what you said and didn't mean that, and all these, there's a bunch of different factors at play, right? So what can people do if they think or they know some of these things have been done in the past?
Yeah, I think that get out of your head about it, because you are probably overthinking it, which means that there's a high chance you're never going to do anything about it. But if you get out of your head and you take action, and you can follow the arc, right? Ask a question. And you can start by asking a pre-question. Hey, is it okay if I talk to you about something? I know it's been a few months since this happened, but I have come to, I now know that I accidentally offended you, and I have no excuse, and I should have known better, and I have educated myself. It's important to tell the work that you've done on yourself that shows how you now know better, and that you promise to do better in the future. It's this, again, these conversations, they don't have to be long. This could be a 30-second conversation. But whatever you do not over apologize. Do not go to the point of saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I know I said that thing a few months ago and it was really awful, and I've been hating myself for it, and I can never forgive myself, and oh my gosh. And then they feel like they have to comfort you. No. Don't make it into don't make it a huge production. Be sincere. Admit what you now know. Admit that you're going to do better, and move on. And they will be incredibly grateful that you took that time. But again, get out of your head about it.
Well, and it's so important to remember that, you apologizing, I feel like a lot of times when people do that overthinking thing, they concentrate on what they think will happen as a result of what they're about to do or what they're about to say. And that, you might be right, you might also not be right. And so expecting, it's like you don't volunteer expecting to get a gold star for it. You don't apologize expecting to be thanked for that apology. If you're doing these things with the expectation that you will get something from it, you're doing them for all the wrong reasons, and you're probably not going to do it very well. So I love the idea of like not really descending into this crazy, self-flagellation thing, because it centers you in the problem as opposed, in the issue.
That's
as opposed
right.
to, but also, yeah, it makes it really obvious that you're trying to be comforted, or that something needs to be said. You're putting that onus on the other person when it's not their problem to deal with.
That's right. They have enough emotional labor, I'm sure.
Yeah. All right, so we only have 10 minutes left in today's session, and it always goes way too quickly, but I want to try and make sure we get to some of these other questions that were asked. So this person had asked, how can we stay updated on Allyship's best practices? For example, language is evolving constantly, so how can I make sure that I'm updated on the do's and don'ts? Now, I feel like we've talked a little bit about this as far as Googling, but is there anything else that you want to say to address this, this question?
Yeah, there's a weekly newsletter that goes out on Friday mornings, and it's also a Twitter account called Better Allies. And every week, the author, Karen Catlin, sends out 5 ally actions, and they're great. They're simple things that you can do as a peer, as a coworker, as a leader to stand up for someone who has fewer advantages than you. And they're all really, really great. Highly recommend that you either follow the Twitter account, get the newsletter. That I'll put the link in the chat, but it's betterallies.com. And it's a great resource. I personally focus a lot more on, I also send out a weekly newsletter, which people love as well, but it's different than Better Allies. It also has 5 pieces of information every week. It's called 5 Things, and it goes out on Saturday mornings, but it's focused specifically on good news and stories that I find that are uplifting, positive, some sort of positive change, mostly policies, and all related to diversity, equity, and inclusion, or corporate social responsibility. So I call it Good Vibes in DEI. The website, or I'll put the link to get that in the chat as well. But the 5 Things newsletter is really fun. It's really positive. It's always good news. And then on Mondays at 2 o'clock on LinkedIn, we do a video recap, 5 things in 15 minutes. So that's fun too.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And actually, if you want to share with me those links, I know you had another one about the ARC method that you had shared earlier. If you want to share those with me, I'm more than happy to make sure that those get into the rewatch email as well. And we'll see if we can also link them on the recording on our website or on YouTube.
Great.
I'm also having a bunch of questions in DMs from people asking about further training that is available for stuff like this. Obviously, it's available in a lot of places. Are there any places that you recommend?
Well, I mean, I do training, I do training all the time. So within my firm, we have a team of folks who do our version of unconscious bias training, which is our non-traditional take on the subject. We have specific identity trainings, an anti-racism workshop, LGBTQ inclusion workshops, cultural competency trainings. So we offer all of that stuff. We also license LGBTQ e-learnings, so online training. So that's, we definitely do it. As far as online training that's related to unconscious bias and inclusive leadership, I would check out LinkedIn Learning. We don't offer online training that's not LGBTQ specific at this time.
Okay. I'm also including a link in the chat thread here. So if you are interested in chats on Allyship, I've shared a link that'll lead you directly to a search of our prior chat, our video library. So you can check those out there. You can also look at, do a search for inclusive, inclusion, LGBTQ, anti-racist, BIPOC, all those different terms. Unfortunately, our system is not, as tuned in as Google to know exactly what you're looking for. So definitely try like a couple different words, different tenses. But we have a lot of really great chats that we've held previously, as well as chats that are scheduled for the future, where we talk about ways that you can stay up to date, what places you can go, like resources, all that kind of stuff. So definitely check that out. And honestly, just think of it in the same terms as you would kind of any other changing thing. It's so simple to kind of compare the two, but like business etiquette. Business etiquette now is not what it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. It's not even what it was 5 years ago. So these are things that you make an effort to stay up to date on. You can make the same amount of effort to stay up to date on something like this. It's a couple of years ago, the focus at least was on trans individuals and people who are in transition or are non-binary or gender non-conforming. And so a lot of the questions revolved around that area. And it's the same idea. You can absolutely ask questions and you can always learn something from the internet. Check your sources, obviously, try and make sure you're learning from informed places, but using that mentality of, okay, let's search a lot of different places and see what makes sense, what's all similar, what's not. As long as you're coming from a place of respect and trying to learn, you will get a lot more positive feedback and a lot more positive interactions than you will if you just kind of let things fall where they may and act like you've always acted. Okay, so to kind of round us out here, because we only have about 4 minutes left, what are, of all the things that we talked about, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that you wish we had gotten to either in the questions or in some of the topics that we've discussed today that we haven't managed to cover?
One thing we haven't talked about much is essentially we all have something going on. So whether it's our race or our sexual orientation or a pandemic and remote learning or medical issues or whatever, most of us are dealing with something. And we cannot let that be an excuse to not stand up for those who have even less than us, because it costs nothing. So how can you use your advantages to show up for folks who have even less than you? We all have something to give. And I believe it's the universal law that the more we give, the more we receive. So it's a universal thing.
I could not agree more. It's definitely important to remember that just because you have certain trials and tribulations in your life, just because there's certain areas that you haven't succeeded or you faced more hardship or something, does not, all these things are always relative. I heard it a lot in response to the pandemic, but we're all going through this storm, but we're not all in the same boat. And so trying to remember that everybody is doing or fighting something that nothing about makes it a lot easier to come at people, especially when you're not their biggest fan, makes it a lot easier to come at them with it at a base level of respect and understanding, which gives you a lot more leeway to deal with that person or those people that maybe don't seem like they want to get on board with the equal treatment of others, or maybe seem like they just can't stand things to not be as they've always been. It can be a lot easier to try and deal with people in that way. So thank you so much, Bernadette, for sharing that.
You're welcome. It's a challenge for everyone.
It is. And something else that you had said earlier that it didn't really kind of click until now, when you were talking about some of the questions you can ask someone if they've maybe if you've witnessed a microaggression or witnessed somebody saying something super offensive and you want to address it, you did a really great thing, which was hold space and wait for that person to speak. Because I feel like, especially in awkward situations, it can be really tempting to fill the silence, because you're just like, you don't want to have the focus on what just happened, because you're like, no, we got to fix this. So I love that idea, and I find it really hard to do, but it's so important to ask that question and then wait for the answer, because that person can't answer. They might not give you a great answer, and so you want to ask follow-up questions, but they can't answer at all if you don't stop talking.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Plant the seed.
Very cool. All right, so we are at the end of our time, guys. I'm so sorry. I know we didn't get to every question that was asked ahead of time, but I want to say a huge thank you to our amazing audience. Y'all seemed wrapped with attention this whole time, so thank you so much for taking time out of your day to come spend time with us and learn with us. And Bernadette, huge thank you to you. I love doing these chats. They're my favorite part of my job, but it's always really great to spend time learning from someone. So I just want to say a huge thank you to you for spending time with us and bringing your expertise and your experience so that we can learn.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Everyone, I hope you have a wonderful week. I hope that you have prosperous careers and lives and all of that good stuff. I'm cheering for you. Take care.
All right, everybody, have a wonderful rest of your week, and hopefully I'll see many more of you around on chats to come. Bye, everybody.